The rain hammered against the cabin windows like 1,000 desperate fists. It was a cold, lonely sound that matched the emptiness inside my chest. I sat by the fireplace, clutching a glass of amber liquid I didn't really want. Outside, the storm was turning the world into a blurred mess of gray and black. I had chosen this isolated spot to escape the noise of a world that felt too loud ever since the light went out of my life. The wind howled through the trees, sounding almost like a voice calling out from the dark. I took a sip, feeling the burn in my throat, but it couldn't touch the ice in my heart. 4 years of silence had made me a ghost in my own home. I looked at the old, dusty swing set through the glass, its metal chains swaying back and forth in the gale. It looked like a skeleton in the moonlight. Just as I prepared to close the curtains and retreat into sleep, the security buzzer on the gate screamed. It was a sharp, piercing noise that shattered the stillness. My heart jolted against my ribs. Nobody ever came here. On the grainy black and white monitor, a man stood soaked to the bone, holding something small and familiar. My name is Imani Harper. I am 34 years old, and for a long time, I was known as the tragic face of Harper Tech. People saw me on the news as the widow who lost everything, the woman who built a digital empire alongside her husband only to watch it crumble into a pile of grief. I used to be sharp, driven, and full of life, but 4 years ago, the color drained out of my world. I became a recluse, hiding behind the high walls of my estate and the thick glass of my office. My son, Leo, was my heartbeat. He was only 6 when the world broke. I remember his laugh, the way he smelled like grass and sunshine, and his obsession with a tattered stuffed rabbit named Barnaby. When the news came that his school bus had been swept away by a flash flood, I stopped breathing. They told me the current was too strong. They told me no one could survive that much water. I spent years staring at his empty bedroom, waiting for a miracle that never came. I was 31 when I buried an empty casket, and since then, I have been a woman simply waiting for the clock to run out. The man at the gate didn't move. He stood there under the pouring rain, staring directly into the camera lens. He looked terrified, his shoulders hunched against the wind. In his hands, he held a muddy, water-damaged stuffed rabbit. My breath hitched. I knew every stitch on that toy. I had sewn the left ear back on myself using a specific blue thread after our dog had chewed it. I hit the release button for the gate with trembling fingers. I didn't think about the danger. I only thought about the rabbit. I opened the heavy oak front door as he trudged up the driveway. He was a thin man in a tattered hoodie, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He wasn't a criminal. He looked like a man haunted by a ghost. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice cracking. He didn't answer at first. He just held out the toy. "I worked at a place called the Silent Pines," he said, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "I was an orderly in the memory care unit. I saw things I can't forget." He stepped closer into the light of the porch. "Patient 402 doesn't speak, Miss Harper, but he draws your face on every napkin he can find." The man slid a damp, crumpled photograph across the marble island in my kitchen. My hands shook so violently that I almost dropped it. It was a picture of a boy sitting by a window. He was thinner than I remembered, his face longer and more mature, but the eyes were unmistakable. He had my late husband's hazel eyes, bright, piercing, and full of a hidden spark. It was Leo. He was alive. He was 10 years old now, and he was sitting in a facility 4 states away while I sat here mourning him. I felt a surge of nausea followed by a blinding, white-hot rage. "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded. The man, whose name was Silas, looked down at his feet. "They told us he was an orphan with severe brain damage. But I saw your interview on TV last week. I recognized the rabbit he sleeps with every night. I stole it and ran. I couldn't be part of it anymore." My mind raced. If Leo was alive, who had put him there? Who had told the world he was dead? I realized then that my grief wasn't a tragedy. It was a cage designed by someone who wanted me out of the way. I had to be careful. If I screamed or called the police immediately, the people who hid my son might finish what they started. I spent the rest of the night digging through digital files I hadn't touched in years. I was still the majority shareholder of Harper Tech, even if I had stepped back from the daily operations. I needed to see who was moving the money. My sister-in-law, Beatrice, and my lead attorney, Julian, had been managing the Harper Trust since the accident. They were the ones who constantly pressured me to sign over the remaining shares for my mental health. I pulled up the internal ledgers, bypassing the surface reports. Deep in the subfolders of corporate expenses, I found a recurring monthly payment of $12,000. It was disguised as server maintenance and funneled into a shell company called SP Logistics. I tracked the routing number. It led directly to a private medical group that owned the Silent Pines. The person who had authorized every single payment was Julian. My hands turned cold. My own lawyer, the man who sat at my husband's funeral and held my hand, was paying to keep my son in a prison. The next morning, Beatrice and Julian arrived at my house for what they called a wellness check. They looked like the perfect picture of professional concern. Beatrice was wearing a cream-colored silk suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. Julian carried a leather briefcase, his expression one of practiced sympathy. "Imani, darling, you look exhausted," Beatrice said, reaching out to touch my arm. I pulled away, pretending to be overwhelmed by emotion. "I just had a bad night," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. Julian set his briefcase on the table. "We've discussed this, Imani. The company needs a stable hand. If you sign the final consolidation papers today, you can go to that retreat in Switzerland we talked about. You can finally rest." I looked at them and saw them for what they really were. Vultures. They didn't want me to rest. They wanted me gone so they could control the billion-dollar empire Marcus and I had built. They had used my son as a pawn to break my spirit. I looked down at the documents, my eyes stinging. I needed to play the part of the broken widow just a little longer to get what I needed. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice small and weak. "I just need a few more days to clear my head." Julian sighed, a sound of feigned disappointment. "The board is getting restless, Imani. We can't hold them off forever." After they left, I didn't waste a second. I didn't call the local police because I didn't know who Julian had in his pocket. Instead, I packed a small bag, grabbed my laptop, and took the keys to the old SUV I kept in the back garage. I avoided the main roads and the highway cameras. I drove for 10 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and a desperate burning hope. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leo's face in that photograph. I saw him sitting by a window, drawing his mother's face on napkins, because he thought I had abandoned him. The thought made me want to scream, but I channeled that energy into the steering wheel. I arrived at the border of the 4th state, just as the sun began to rise. The Silent Pines was located in a remote area, hidden behind a thick forest of pines that blocked the building from the view of the main road. It was a fortress of secrets. The facility was a brutalist concrete building that looked more like a prison than a hospital. I didn't go in through the front door as Imani Harper. I used a fake ID I had kept from an old tech project and put on a pair of glasses and a professional wig. I introduced myself as a representative from a high-end donor foundation looking to scout new facilities for a grant. The director, a cold man named Dr. Thorne, walked me through the halls. He boasted about their discreet services for families who wanted their loved ones kept out of the public eye. My skin crawled as we passed rooms with heavy locks and reinforced glass. Finally, we reached the memory unit. I saw the children sitting in a common area. They were well-dressed and the room was clean, but their eyes were vacant. They were heavily sedated. Then I saw him. He was sitting in a chair by the far window, staring out at the trees. He was wearing a simple blue sweater. My heart stopped. It was my Leo. He looked so much like Marcus that it hurt to look at him. He didn't look up when we entered the room. "This is patient 402, Dr. Thorne said dismissively. "He's been with us for 4 years. Nonverbal, trauma-induced amnesia. No family." I had to bite my tongue to keep from shouting that I was his mother. I walked over to the table where Leo was sitting. On a stack of white paper napkins there were dozens of charcoal sketches. They were all of me. The way I looked before the accident, with long hair and a smile. My throat tightened. I leaned down and whispered, "Leo." He didn't move. Then I began to hum a soft, low melody. It was a song Marcus used to sing to him every night about a little boat on a silver sea. Slowly, very slowly, Leo's hand began to tremble. He turned his head, his eyes focusing on me for the first time. There was a spark of recognition so deep it felt like an electric shock. "Mama?" he whispered. The sound was tiny, like a dry leaf skittering across pavement, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "What did he say?" "He doesn't talk." I stood up, my fear replaced by a cold, calculating power. "He said my name," I said, my voice echoing in the sterile room. I turned to Dr. Thorne and pulled out my phone, showing him the wire transfer records I had downloaded. "My name is Imani Harper. You are holding my son who was declared dead 4 years ago. This facility has been receiving illegal payments from Julian Vane to keep him here under a false identity." Thorne's face went pale. He tried to reach for his radio, but I stepped into his space. "I have a live digital uplink to an offshore server. If my son and I aren't in my car in 5 minutes, every major news outlet and the FBI will receive a dossier on human trafficking, insurance fraud, and medical kidnapping. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cell much smaller than this one." Thorne was a coward. He saw the fire in my eyes and knew I wasn't bluffing. He signaled the orderlies to stand down. I grabbed Leo's hand. His skin was so warm, so real, and led him out of that house of horrors. As we walked to the car, I felt the weight of 4 years of grief finally start to lift, replaced by a mission. In the back of the SUV, Leo clung to the muddy rabbit Silas had brought me. He was confused and scared, his mind foggy from years of medication. I drove to a secluded cabin owned by a friend from my college days, a place no one in my current life knew about. For 48 hours, I stayed by his side, helping him through the rebound effect as the sedatives left his system. We talked in small bursts. He told me that Beatrice had visited him once a year, telling him that I had died in the flood and that he had to stay in the special school to stay safe from the people who killed me. The level of cruelty was staggering. They hadn't just stolen his life, they had poisoned his memory of me. As his mind cleared, he began to remember more. He remembered the night of the flood, how Julian had picked him up from the school before the bus even left, telling him there was an emergency. There was no accident for Leo. The bus crash was a cover-up, a tragic coincidence they exploited, or perhaps something even darker. I held him as he cried, promising him that no one would ever hurt him again. I knew I couldn't stay in hiding forever. To truly protect Leo, I had to dismantle the people who did this. I left Leo with 2 trusted security guards I had hired from a private firm outside the city, men who had no ties to Julian. I returned to the estate alone, wearing my broken mask. I invited Beatrice and Julian over for the final signing of the trust papers. I told them I was ready to move on. Beatrice was ecstatic. She even brought a bottle of expensive champagne. "You're doing the right thing, Imani," she said, her voice dripping with fake honey. "Marcus would want the company to stay in the family." I smiled, a cold, empty thing. "You're right, Beatrice. Family is everything." I had spent the afternoon rigging the guest wing with high-definition hidden cameras and microphones. I also left my jewelry box open on the vanity in Beatrice's room, with a fake suicide note tucked inside. I wanted to see how far their depravity went. I watched the live feed from my tablet in the kitchen as they retreated to the guest room to review the documents. The feed was crystal clear. Beatrice picked up the note and read it aloud. She didn't cry. Instead, she laughed. "She's finally going to do it," Beatrice whispered. "The grieving widow can't take the pressure anymore." Julian leaned back in the armchair, looking smug. "Once she's gone, the investigation into the school bus accident stays buried forever. Nobody will ever look for the boy if the mother isn't around to push for answers." Beatrice nodded, her eyes cold. "It was brilliant, Julian. Using that flood to disappear him was the best move we ever made. The insurance payout alone funded the first 2 years of the facility fees." They started discussing the accidental drowning I would have at the retreat in Switzerland. My blood ran cold, but I kept my hands steady. I had it all on record. The admission of kidnapping, the insurance fraud, and the conspiracy to commit murder. They thought they were playing a game of chess with a broken woman, but they didn't realize I had already taken their king. I saved the files to multiple cloud drives and prepared for the final act of their downfall. Monday morning was the date of the emergency board meeting. Julian had prepared everything to strip my power and hand control to Beatrice. The boardroom was filled with the top executives of Harper Tech, many of whom had been loyal to my husband. They looked at me with pity as I walked in, wearing a sharp black power suit. Julian slid the leather-bound folder toward me. "Imani, we just need your signature on the final page to authorize the transfer to the Beatrice Harper Trust." I looked at the pen, then back at Julian. "You know, Julian, I was thinking about what you said, about doing this for Leo's memory." Julian nodded solemnly. "It's the only way to honor Kim." I stood up and walked to the head of the table. "The problem is, Julian, you can't honor a memory when the person is still breathing." I hit a button on my remote, and the large monitors in the boardroom flickered to life. Instead of the company's quarterly growth charts, the video of Beatrice and Julian in my guest room began to play. The room went deathly silent as their own voices filled the air, boasting about the kidnapping and my planned accident. The faces of the board members shifted from confusion to absolute horror. Beatrice stood up, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. "This is a fabrication. It's AI-generated," she shrieked. I didn't say a word. I simply opened the doors to the boardroom. My security team walked in, leading Dr. Thorne from the Silent Pines. He was in handcuffs, accompanied by 2 federal agents I had contacted the night before. Thorne didn't even look at Beatrice. He went straight to the microphone. "I was paid by Julian Vane to hold Leo Harper under a false name," he confessed, his voice shaking. Julian tried to bolt for the side exit, but the doors were already guarded. "I didn't kill him," Beatrice screamed, her poise completely shattered. "He's alive. I kept him safe in a luxury facility. I saved him." She didn't realize that in her panic, she had just confessed to a room full of witnesses and the rolling cameras of the federal agents. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The legal guillotine had fallen. They hadn't just lost the company, they had lost their freedom. The police led them out in zip ties. I had tipped off the press, and as the lobby doors opened, the flashes of 100 cameras lit up the room. I walked down the steps of the Harper Tech headquarters, and for the first time in 4 years, the air didn't feel heavy. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore. The headlines the next day were a whirlwind of shock and celebration. The resurrection of Leo Harper and the vultures of Harper Tech fall. I didn't care about the fame, I only cared about the fact that I could finally bring my son home without fear. We spent the next few months in a quiet coastal town, away from the noise. Leo began physical therapy and started seeing a specialist to help him process the trauma. He began to laugh again, a real, belly-deep laugh that filled the house. I thought the nightmare was finally over. I thought I had uncovered every secret. But as the trial for Beatrice and Julian approached, a package arrived at my door that changed everything once again. It was a manila envelope with no return address. Inside the envelope was a single burner phone and a handwritten note. It said, "You only found the puppets. You haven't found the puppeteer. Check the Phoenix Project archives." I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Julian's. He was writing to me from his holding cell. I turned on the phone, and there was a single video file saved on it. It showed a high-end medical clinic in the Swiss Alps, dated only 6 months ago. A man was walking through a garden, his back to the camera. Even from the back, the way he tilted his head and the broadness of his shoulders made my heart stop. It was Marcus. My husband, the man I had mourned for 4 years, wasn't dead. He hadn't been swept away in a separate accident, as I was led to believe. The phone also contained a login for an offshore account titled The Phoenix Project. I spent the next 48 hours hacking into the encrypted database. What I found was a billion-dollar service for the ultra-wealthy to delete their identities and start over. Marcus hadn't disappeared to protect us. He had paid them to disappear him. The records showed that Marcus was being investigated by the SEC for a massive Ponzi scheme within the company that I had no idea about. Instead of facing the music or protecting his family, he used the company's emergency reserves to buy himself a new life. He had left me to face the creditors, the grief, and the collapse of our world. But it was worse than that. The logs showed he had authorized Beatrice to manage Leo. He knew our son was in that facility. He had allowed his own child to be drugged and hidden so that his death would provide the perfect emotional shield for his own disappearance. The betrayal was so deep it felt physical. like a blade between my ribs. I had spent 4 years loving a man who had sold our son's soul for his own comfort. My love for Marcus died in that moment, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I wasn't going to just let the law handle this. I was going to erase him the way he had tried to erase us. I tracked the location of the Phoenix retreat. It was a gated community for the reborn in the mountains near Zurich. I didn't call the authorities. I flew to Switzerland under a new business alias, leaving Leo in the safe hands of his new teachers and my security team. I found Marcus at a lakeside cafe, looking tanned, relaxed, and years younger. He was sitting with a woman who looked like a younger version of me, and a small girl who called him Papa. I felt a wave of cold fury, but I kept my face neutral. I waited until he was alone, then I walked up and sat directly across from him. He looked up, a smile on his face that instantly turned into a mask of pure terror. "Imani?" he whispered, his voice trembling. His coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the stone floor. "You look surprised, Marcus," I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. "Did you think I wouldn't find you after I found Leo?" He looked around frantically, his comfortable life suddenly under threat. "I did it for you, Imani," he stammered, the same old lies falling from his lips. "The debt, the investigation, they would have taken everything from you. I had to disappear so the trail would go cold." I leaned in, my eyes boring into his. "You put our son in a cage. You let him think I was dead. You let him sit in a room for 4 years, drawing my face on napkins while you played house in the Alps." Marcus started to cry, the pathetic, shallow tears of a man caught in a trap. "I'll give you money. I have 50 million in a private account. Take it and go. Let me stay dead." I looked at him with pure disgust. "You think you can buy your way out of this? You think 50 million is the price of my son's childhood?" I pulled out a document I had prepared. "Sign this. It's a formal release of your old identity and a full confession of the Ponzi scheme, including the names of everyone involved in the Phoenix project. If you sign it, I won't call the police right now." Marcus grabbed the pen, his desperation clouding his judgment. He thought if he signed the paper and gave me the money, I would go away and let him keep his new life. He signed his name, his real name, Imani Harper, on every page, notarizing his own crimes. He even added the digital keys to his hidden accounts, thinking it was his get-out-of-jail-free card. Once he was finished, he looked at me with a pathetic hope. "Are we even now?" I stood up, tucking the documents into my bag. "We will never be even, Marcus, but you are right about one thing. You are dead." I walked away without looking back. As soon as I was out of his sight, I sent the digitized confession and the bank keys directly to the SEC, the FBI, and the Swiss Federal Police. But I had one more move. The document he signed wasn't just a confession, it was a legal erasure. By claiming his old identity in a notarized document, he had technically invalidated his new Swiss identity. I had used my tech background to create a logic bomb within the Phoenix Project's servers using the codes Julian had given me. The moment Marcus's confession hit the web, the bomb triggered. It didn't just expose him. It wiped every trace of his new identity from every database in the world. His bank accounts, his property deeds, his residency permit, all gone. When the Swiss police arrived at the cafe 10 minutes later, they didn't find a wealthy resident named Stefan Vogel. They found a man with no passport, no money, and a mountain of international warrants. Because he had legally signed away his new life to me in that document, he had no legal standing to fight the extradition. I watched from across the square as they loaded him into a van. He looked small and broken, stripped of the luxury he had stolen from his family. He had tried to play God with our lives, but he forgot that I was the one who built the systems he tried to hide in. The fallout was global. The Phoenix Project collapsed, leading to the arrests of dozens of white-collar criminals who had faked their deaths. Harper Tech was cleared of the debt once I turned over Marcus's hidden accounts, which were more than enough to pay back the investors he had defrauded. I was hailed as a hero, but I didn't feel like one. I felt like a mother who had finally cleared the weeds from her garden. I returned to the estate and began the process of rebuilding. I sold the big, lonely mansion and bought a beautiful, sun-drenched house by the sea. I renamed the company's charitable arm the Leo Foundation, dedicated to finding and recovering children who had been lost to the system or criminal conspiracies. We hired Silas, the man who brought the rabbit to my door, as our lead investigator. He finally had a job he could be proud of. My life was no longer about the quiet luxury of a mourning widow. It was about the loud, vibrant reality of a woman who had fought for her family and won. 6 months later, the trials were over. Beatrice and Julian were sentenced to 20 years each for kidnapping and conspiracy. Marcus was facing a lifetime in federal prison for his financial crimes and his role in Leo's disappearance. I visited him once, just to show him a picture of Leo. My son was standing on a surfboard, grinning at the camera, his eyes full of life and light. Marcus looked at the photo and started to sob, but I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a sense of closure. "He doesn't remember you, Marcus," I said quietly, "and I've made sure he never has to." I walked out of the prison and never looked back. I had reclaimed my name, my son, and my future. The tragedy that was supposed to destroy me had instead forged me into something unbreakable. I was Imani Harper, and I was finally, truly alive. I drove back to the coast, the windows down, the salt air filling my lungs. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like peace. I sat on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and violet. Leo was down by the water, playing with a new dog we had adopted, a golden retriever who never left his side. He looked back at me and waved, his smile bright and genuine. I waved back, feeling a warmth in my chest that no fire could match. We had traveled through the storm, through the betrayal, and through the darkness of 1,000 lies. But we had come out the other side together. The dead son was alive, and the broken mother was whole. I picked up the tattered stuffed rabbit, Barnaby, which sat on the table next to me. It was clean now, its ear firmly sewn on with the same blue thread. It was a reminder of where we had been. But it no longer held the weight of grief. The cycle was complete. From the storm to the chaos, then the healing, and finally the calm. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the waves, knowing that the only knock on my door from now on would be the sound of a new beginning. Imani chose to erase Marcus's existence, rather than just putting him in jail. Do you think she went too far, or did he deserve to lose everything down to his very name? Type justice in the comments if you think she did the right thing. Stories like Imani's remind us that the truth always finds a way out of the dark. If you believe that justice should always be served and that a mother's love is unbreakable, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't miss our next deep dive into a betrayal that no one saw coming. Welcome to the family.